Ladies and gentlemen, the family is going to be entering the room shortly. As a reminder, please be sure your cell phones have been turned off, and we'll rise momentarily. The family will be coming in from this side. Also, Rabbi Jason Fenster will be officiating. Please rise. Just adding a little bit more. We ask everyone to please be seated at this time. Once again, we want to welcome those of you who are online. At this time, Rabbi Jason Fenster will begin the funeral services. Mr. Herbert S Wander.
To be here in this moment, whether you're sitting in this room or joining online, to be present, and to bear witness to a family in mourning, to bear witness to and to celebrate the life and the legacy of a man who is so beloved, the spoke of a family, a person who built and sustained relationships, who created an incredible legacy worthy of celebration. To be here in this moment is a mitzvah, is a sacred obligation. It matters. It matters that we can show up for each other, even and especially after this year. We can be present with one another, to hold each other up, to celebrate and to honor the life and the legacy of Herb. In Jewish tradition, in moments like this, we often turn to psalms, to biblical poetry. It speaks to the nature of the human experience, not to say that right now anyone feels exactly the way that you feel, but just to give language or to give voice to the depth of human emotion. And in particular, we're accustomed to turning to the 23rd Psalm. It's language that we know. It speaks about the valley of deep and dark shadows. And sometimes we sit there, and it's okay. It's okay to sit in the valley of darkness. It's time to mourn, for tears. But I think we forget about the rest of the psalm. It tells us that while we sit in the depths, Goodness and mercy follow us all the days of our lives. And the Hebrew literally means chase. Goodness and mercy, life and legacy and memory and blessing chase us out of a valley of darkness towards light, towards a straight path, towards still waters. It's okay to sit in the darkness, to dwell in the valley. And we know that behind us, beckoning us, calling us, is the goodness, the kindness, the compassion, the blessing. All that Herb built, and the legacy that all of you will continue to carry forward. 23rd Psalm. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, B'hinot deshe yarbitzeni, Al mei menuchot yenahaleini, Nafshi yeshovev, Nafshi yeshovev, Yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo, Gam ki elech b'geit zalmavet, Lo irara ki ata imadi, Shivtecha umishantecha, Shivtecha umishantecha, Hema yenachamuni, Taroch lefanai shulchan, Taroch lefanai shulchan, Taroch lefanai shulchan, Neged sorerai, Dishanta bashemen roshi, Kosi revaya, Dishanta bashemen roshi, Kosi revaya, Ach tov v'chesed, Yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. Ach tov v'chesed, Yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai, V'shavti b'veit Adonai, L'orech yamim. We'll read together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life. We shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Our job in this moment is to tell stories. The Hebrew word for memory doesn't just mean to remember. It also means to mention. As if to say that memory can't just live in our hearts or in our minds. Memory must live on our lips. And when we speak memory into being, when we tell the stories, the impact, the influence, the blessing, The little stories that you've told 1,000 times, or the big life-changing stories. When we speak memory into being, memory becomes a blessing. And memory can't live in an individual. Memory must live in the context of community. So we bear witness. We listen. We share. And we speak memory into being. So memory might become a blessing. Adonai Natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. In his sorrow, Job cried out, God has given and God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. God gave a great gift with her. And there aren't words to describe what it means to have lost him. And nonetheless, we say, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach, may God's name be blessed. As I just said to the family before, not to say that there is some master plan or purpose in the loss of a loved one, but to tell us that even in this moment, that there is something bigger and deeper that we can ground ourselves in. Blessings to be spoken aloud. And so we'll begin sharing memories by inviting up Herb's children, Lois, Susie, and Dan, to share some words.
I want to share my dad's proudest accomplishment. And his proudest accomplishment was not being a member of the NACRAC delegation, which met Nelson Mandela after he got released from a South African prison. And it was not, as my children like to say, being on the wall at Federation, receiving the Julius Rosenwald Award. And it was not being chairman of a Sarbanes-Oxley committee where he got a chance to be able to testify in front of Congress. And it was not, as Alan Mushin mentioned to me a few days ago, that he was the key hire at Catton Law, which really helped galvanize the firm and bring it to where it is today. No, my dad's key accomplishment was, this is probably when I was in high school, and he came home one evening, and this is maybe after his 1,000th dinner or lunch at Federation, and he said, Danny, I'm never going to have a fucking tuna fish sandwich again. I got Federation to have hot dogs. Looking at my dad and what he's meant to me, I jump back to one of my fondest family memories. At our Shabbat dinners, we had a family tradition of trying to read a chapter of the Bible every week. After a while, the Bible discussions dissipated, but our robust discussions never ended, with my mother, of blessed memory, Ruthie, a liberal, and my dad, a conservative. In all these discussions, one of my dad's greatest strengths was his ability to just listen and create space for all of us to find our own voice. It isn't that my dad didn't speak, but when he did, it was with great clarity and insight. I believe it is one of the reasons he was such a great mentor to so many people in this room. It was his ability to help guide people by letting them find their own voices. For me, these discussions helped me find my own voice. And for my involvement in the Jewish community, it is the blending of being inspired by the Jewish text to perform action and realize the special responsibility that we all have as Jews to perform acts of tzedakah and mitzvot. Fast forward to today. Ruth and I have been able to bring these meaningful dinner table discussions to our own home. Like those Shabbat dinners of many years ago, we share reading many great books together. One of them that's had a particular impact on all of us is The Great Partnership by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. When Rachel and Hannah are discussing this book, I can see the spark of intellectual curiosity and connection to one of Judaism's greatest modern scholars. This is where my daughters are helping to find their own voice in participation in the Jewish community. As my dad's wisdom guided me, it has also been transformative for my family in providing a meaningful legacy for the next generation.
My parents bought a prairie-style house in 1966. Over time, they completely overhauled the design. Our brightly painted red dining room was an extreme example of their contemporary style. At the dining room's red and orange striped tables, I sat for hours editing my high school papers with my dad. Over the years, I appreciated the end results and kept coming back for more. However, my behavior was not always exemplary. There were many thrown pencils and more than a few tears. As for my dad, he patiently sipped his vodka while brandishing his red pen, a pen many of you might recognize. I have such gratitude for the time and wisdom my dad gave me. He was patient, usually, and after all those cross-outs and question marks and calls to avoid repetition, my papers were more cogent and insightful. Through those editing sessions, my dad wasn't just teaching me to be a better communicator, but how to live my life more fully, with intention and purpose. He often began by encouraging me to let go of the current draft and figure out what I was trying to say. Define your ultimate goal. Be clear and concise on your why. And perhaps, even more meaningful to me as a young woman, aim big. Other lessons were that 90% of writing is rewriting, that you won't ever get it right the first time, and that is true in life as well. You need to practice, make mistakes, experiment, try new things and new ideas, and put in the hard work. And finally, that it is critical to rethink your assumptions and find people around you who can offer you feedback. You don't have to do it alone. While hard work was certainly key to my dad's character, one of his other frequent phrases, "the perfect is the enemy of the good," was an exhortation to just make a decision. Put in the effort, but also know when good enough is good enough. As a teenager, I stridently resisted when my dad told me to get rid of my babies, those sentences that you love but don't quite fit in anymore once you've found your key points. Now, that lesson is one of my favorites. I see it as the idea of tzimtzum, that by letting go and pulling back, you can propel forward. What doesn't serve you, as you are now, let it go. When others, like your children, are ready, let them go. Decades later, in the final chapter of his life, on a sunny April day, Dad and I are sitting around a different table. This one on a shady porch next to a bright blue pool. And he is still helping me navigate challenging decisions, probing me to get to the heart of my why. He's not just sharing that wisdom with me, but also with his dear son-in-law, my husband Rich, and his beloved grandchildren, Abby and Sam. As we hug goodbye for what turned out to be the last time, I could sense him letting go of his babies. All was good. His red pen could rest. Dad, with my infinite gratitude and unbounded love, go in peace. Perhaps some of you have heard or read about the 5 love languages. Developed by Dr. Gary Chapman in 1992 after counseling hundreds of couples, he recognized that most misunderstandings and unmet needs arose from speaking different primary languages. He recognized a pattern of 5 main love languages that people most responded to: words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, and receiving gifts. To better relate to your partner, the idea is to give them the language they speak. Over the years, I've recognized mine is words of affirmation. Growing up, I had such admiration for my dad, but it wasn't always so easy for us to connect. He was a quiet man with high expectations who grew up in a time where sharing emotion and affection were not encouraged. It was later when I realized what his love language is: acts of service. Dad was always there to help someone out, to mentor them, to give sage advice, to make personal introductions, to take a lead on a fundraising effort, to helping me purchase my first home. I later recognized these acts of service spoke volumes about the kind and loving man he was. By understanding his language, I understood the concept of meeting someone where they are. I stopped pushing for a response and feedback. I learned how to be okay with quiet, even silence. And gradually, I noticed changes in our relationship, more sense of stillness and connection. And I noticed these changes extended to him too, giving him more space to explore his intellectual curiosity by wanting to know more about me and the person I've become. Just in my last visit with him, I noticed how he lit up, asking me questions when I shared how much I loved the movie Nomadland, genuinely wanting to know what I loved about it, asking who was the director. And over time, together, we took on a new shared love language, one of human touch. Rub my back, he'd beckon, which I truly loved doing. Through this act, I felt a true sense of healing and closeness and a recognition of my acts of service. I am so grateful to science for allowing me to visit my dad fully vaccinated just over 2 weeks ago. Our visit was quiet and poignant and full of love and connection. Dad, I will miss you so much, and I thank you for giving us all your gifts of love.
Next, we'll hear from Herb's grandchildren, Sam, Abby, Rachel, and Hannah.
People who know me, even in the slightest, know that I'm obsessed with basketball. How did I get so into hoops? Of course, Grandpa Herb. He gave me my first basketball hoop when I was just a year old. I played all the time. The sport brought the two of us together. One of my earliest memories is when he took me to shoot on the court at the United Center following a Bulls game. The joy on his face after my shot switched through the net, priceless. He loved watching the four of us accomplish great things. Hannah and Rachel in swimming, Abby in soccer, and me in breakdancing. Just kidding. In all seriousness, I know we all pushed a little deeper to perform whenever we saw him in the crowd. He set an example for all of us to work hard, discover knowledge and truth, and better our communities. When I saw him last month for my birthday, that was the happiest I've been in a long time. My grandfather was my biggest champion. I hope his legacy inspires us all to live for family, knowledge, and community.
Hi, I'm Abby Sorkin. One of the greatest parts of Grandpa was his generosity, and as Sam has just shared so eloquently, his love of family. That was manifested in the Wander family trips. From Israel to Disney World, to Hawaii, to Costa Rica, and to Turks and Caicos. These family trips were where we all became so much closer as a family than we ever would have otherwise. These trips were where we all learned and fell in love with playing cards, especially spades, where we spent time with Grandpa, had massive family dinners filled with laughter every single night, and where we just spent time being together in beautiful places. A moment that I particularly remember was Grandpa's joy when the 4 cousins went out to dinner, just the 4 of us in Costa Rica, and Sam insisted on paying by charging it to the room. The fondest memories I have of my family come from these trips, and those trips are all because of Grandpa Herb.
Hi, I'm Rachel Wander. One of the first times that I realized the extent of my grandpa's investment in the Jewish community was when I attended the Julius Rosenwald award ceremony. Flipping through the booklet, I saw that my grandpa had been one of the previous recipients. Since then, I've had the opportunity to watch my grandpa's speech after he was presented with this award, which further impressed on me the importance of the Jewish community and philanthropy in my grandpa's life. Grandpa also passed on this love of Israel and Judaism to his grandchildren. Some of my earliest memories are from the trip to Israel that he took our family on when I was only 5 years old. And I know that I and my sister and cousins as well have been consistently involved with the Jewish community through college through organizations such as Hillel, Chabad, and AIPAC. I know that as I continue my involvement in the Jewish community and in philanthropy, I will do so in my grandpa's memory, and I will strive to live up to his example.
Hi, I'm Hannah Wander. One thing I appreciated so much about my grandpa was how he was so invested in each of us as individual people. He was always so supportive of each of our goals and proud of our accomplishments. Even at 86, he was the first comment on Sam's sports newsletter where he wrote, "Really info-packed, terrific first edition, your loyal fan, Herb." He read Abby's entire thesis, all 117 pages. When Rachel told him that she was interning at the Susquehanna International Group this summer, we weren't surprised that he knew one of the organization's lawyers. He took the time to give me feedback on the brief I wrote for my constitutional law class, even though that area of law wasn't his specialty. However, the most valuable lesson he taught me wasn't about success or accomplishment. On the last day I saw him, he told me how important it was to show through your interactions with others how much you appreciated being with them. I know from the stories I've heard from all the people who will miss him that he succeeded at doing this in his own life, and I would be glad to do half as well as he did in mine.
Next, we'll hear from Herb's brother, Arden.
Herb was 7 years older than me, and I was a little tag-along. But he always treated me with tremendous love, kindness, and welcomed me to all his activities. In fact, he arranged for me to ride the team bus to his varsity football games because my dad was in the hospital, Mom was with him. So I got to go to the games with the team and watch Herb play. And I might add that he was a really good defensive tackle and nose guard as a senior. As a senior, Herb was editor of the high school yearbook. I watched him conducting staff meetings in our living room, and I marveled at his calm and kind but forceful leadership. Herb went on to college at the University of Michigan after graduation. Naturally, he became editor of the yearbook at Michigan. Upon my graduation from high school, our mom wanted me to go to an Eastern university. After all, I was valedictorian. Of course, Herb went to Michigan, and I had to go to Michigan. Before I left for school, Herb sat me down and advised me on the courses I should take, in addition to my pre-med courses. His advice has held me in good stead ever since, and I was accepted into medical school after only 3 years. After medical school and internship, I found myself in Vietnam for 1 year. When I came home and landed in California in the middle of the night, I got a flight that stopped at O'Hare Airport. I called Herb, and behold, Herb, Ruthie, and Danny met me in the bowels of O'Hare Airport in the middle of the night. There could be no greater welcome than hugging my brother at that time. Through the years, Herb's love and advice was always with me. When I ran the Boston Marathon, Herb was there to watch. He brought Karen, which is when we first met Karen. To conclude, Herb was a great big brother, the best big brother a kid could have. We deeply loved each other. I have been truly blessed by this great man, my big brother.
When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, he existed. He existed. We can be and be better, for he existed. Next, we'll hear words from Herb's lifelong friend, Donnie.
Thank you, Rabbi. A great tree has fallen. Sorry, I'm having difficulty. I met Herbie 63 years ago, our first day of law school. We were put together quite by accident, and we've been best friends ever since. One of the luckier days of my life. He married two great women, Ruthie and Karen, and left a wonderful family. Lived a great life, became one of the most prominent securities lawyers in the United States. But more important, he was truly a great guy and a great friend and lived a wonderful life. We're all very lucky to have known Herbie. Thank you, Emma.
Next, we'll invite Matt Brown and Art Hahn, two of his partners at Cat and Law.
I practiced law with Herb, for 50 years. In the full meaning of the word, it was one of the great privileges of my life. When I joined Herb at Pope Ballard, he was only 37 years old. He was already the head of the corporate group at that firm, and he was already one of the prominent, recognized lawyers in Chicago. As I was thinking back on it, Herb was always the senior guy in the room, even as a young man. And he was afforded respect that I can't remember any other lawyer receiving. It just came to him. And Herb never played political games. He never did power struggles. It just came to him on the merits. And he wore that respect really elegantly. He deserved the respect on the merits because people came to him for solutions. And he was able to easily, seemingly easily, give wise advice to very complex problems. But it didn't come easy. I remember visiting the house that you described at 11, 12 o'clock at night. He would summon me to bring papers, and he'd be sitting there with a stack of already read papers. The TV would be going with a baseball game, and there'd be a tumbler of vodka. But he worked every night, staying current, informed on the work that he had. Nobody saw it. It was just who Herb was, and he did it continually. He had the canny ability to read people and to understand the practical situation that each problem presented. So he melded the academics, the constant study, the constant work, and a special gift. And that was his magic. And he deployed that magic all of his life. That's what made it so special. From my first days, he put his arm around me and I was under his wing. He had me, as one of my first acts at the law firm, Pope Ballard, fill out a JUF pledge card because that's what young Jewish lawyers were supposed to do. And I did it, even though it was a mystery to me. He trusted me with matters that were candidly well beyond my experience. But I worked as hard as I knew how because I just would never want to disappoint her. When it came time to leave Pope Ballard and join Catton, Herb was the critical part of the deal. Alan, you should recognize that, as you said. And it was a big deal at the time. It was, disruptive in today's word in the legal community at the time. We made the cover of Chicago Magazine, a shootout on LaSalle Street. And it changed Catton from a smart entrepreneurial firm to one of the leading law firms in the city of Chicago and nationally. That was Herb's doing. After he was at Catton, my memory is that he captained almost all of the major deals that the firm did. He was the lawyer calling the shots. When we were pitching new business, we assembled a team. The first name on the team roster was Herb Wander. More importantly, he continued to mentor young lawyers in the way that's been described by his family and other people. He had that way of trusting them and bringing out everything that they had to offer. It was pretty special, and he did it for his whole career. Finally, Kathy and I will never forget that it was Herb's calm, loving presence that shepherded us through the most difficult time in our lives. Herb was there. We're really going to miss him.
It's interesting what we all have to say is so much the same. And so I'll try not to be too repetitive, but Herb was consistent, if nothing else, for all of us. I want to start by saying that I'm downtown Matt Brown, as only Herb Wander called me. Danny asked me to speak about Herb's career activities, especially at Catton, since I met Herb in February of 1979 as a brand new lawyer, just 4 months on the job at Catton. I'm honored to do and to speak to these, Danny particularly because seeing my friends here, it's an honor to represent all of them who, as I sit here, I think maybe we could call ourselves Herb's younger Catton disciples and make a street gang out of it. At any rate, before we get to that topic, I do also have to say, when Herb and I first met, I had dark hair and I was single. And under Herb's watch and tutelage, I literally became an adult as well as a lawyer. Herb was there for all of our important activities and life events, our marriage, our babies, bar and bat mitzvahs, my parents' funerals, the sadder events, and he always helped along the way. I have to go off script for a second, Susie, because as I heard you speaking, it occurred to me that Herb really treated us all as his children in the good way, because the lessons that he taught us were the same lessons he was sharing at home with those he loved the most. The last couple of days have been remarkable. His current and past colleagues have reached out to me by email and on phone calls. We all reminisce how much Herb taught us, mostly gently, but not always. Right? Sometimes he threw the book at you, like literally throwing the book at you. Sometimes he sat and asked questions. He guided us to a conclusion. Sometimes he sat with his red pen and he edited with his beautiful, crisp, clear penmanship. And of course, he stopped for his hydration break at 5 for vodka on the Rex. But the lessons that we learned were fundamental to how we think and approach our work. They're simple, practical principles and Herbisms. Of course, the enemy of the good is the perfect. The golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules. Words are bullets, save your ammunition. Write it first, then read it, and then decide whether to send it. Sometimes the best decisions are decisions not made. Just wait and see what happens. And of course, always be practical. He literally taught us how to write simple, short, declarative statements, bullet points, outlines, plain English before the SEC made rules about plain English. He was the oracle in the corner office at the round desk, a round table at which work was done. Think about that for a moment in a big law firm. Not an imposing desk that messages power and you are in his territory, but a round desk where work is a collaborative effort. I know no one who is more dedicated, work consistently every day on client matters, scholarly articles, reading advance sheets. No one worked harder. Back in the day when we used to have annual firm dinners, the big fancy proms, we called them. A smart-ass friend of mine once said, when Herb said, where was the work that he was to deliver? This kid said, oh, I'll bring it to the party. And Herb said, great, I'll read it then. He was quite a little short. Sometimes at work he was even a little mischievous. Like the time late at night, he was bored in a fancy Wall Street office, a big conference room that had fresh cups of freshly sharpened pencils that were monogrammed. Very fancy outfit. Herb discovered he could toss the pencils at the ceiling and they would stick. And so, by the time he left, an entire cup of pencils were sticking in the ceiling. His business accomplishments are amazing. We all know he was at the elitist and top of the profession, and I won't go through all of the details. You could read those if you don't know them all yourself. But the transactions he had handled then put upstart Catmution on the map. Often Herb took lead, charging with a handful of us Catton lawyers versus dozens of lawyers from the most elite prestigious law firms. I want you to think of the Game of Thrones and Herb being the leader of the Black Watch defending the wall against the White Walkers. If you like that visual, keep it in mind. I think I'd actually like to Photoshop something. At any rate, the deals were epic. Like some of the early deals backed by a young Leon Black, then Michael Milliken's lieutenant at Drexel Burnham, the king of the junk bonds, and us. There were many deals, friendly, hostile, public, private, company purchases, sales, numerous IPOs, and thorny public company issues. But he wasn't just a compendium of the law, although he was, because I think Herb actually had a photographic memory. But as what Arthur said, his advice was what made him truly special. He knew what was necessary and when it was necessary, and he got things done. You may not all know, but we had a Zoom retirement party for Herb just this past February, only 3 months ago. And of course, none of us expected to be here today. We wish we could have been physically together, but the bonus of the Zoom event was there were ex-colleagues from all over. Many lawyers who practice now at other firms spoke at the time of his mentorship and, of course, his example of philanthropy and good deeds. And that he had been a lifelong example to all of them. But what I want to share was, in hindsight, Herb's last drusha to us. Because rather than casual remarks and farewells, Herb actually read to all of us prepared remarks about the law being a noble vocation, that laws are the foundation upon which civil society is built, and that frames the social compact. And that lawyers play a critical role in making that social compact a reality. And only on reflecting here today to get ready, I saw he was still teaching us even at that moment of his retirement. It's our tradition that the law was a divine gift on Sinai. And I think Herb, through his life's work, showed us the best and the truth of that. May his memory be a blessing for his family and for all of us. Amen.
Matt, as you and Art were speaking, I was reminded of what our sages say, what it meant to receive Torah from Sinai. Those who were in the chain of tradition, they said 3 things. They said to raise up many disciples, and Herb raised up many disciples. Once you were in his network, you were in, and every relationship he had, and no matter where he went, he knew someone. He would help you because he knew you. They said, build a fence around the Torah. Find the wisdom that you know and keep it safe and cherish it and protect it. Find the things you love and keep them safe, cherish them and protect them. And he did that with his philanthropy, with his wisdom, and with his family. And the third thing they said was to greet every person with a friendly countenance. No matter who they are, when you're in their presence, let them know that you appreciate them. To receive Torah, to receive a legacy and a gift, to raise up disciples, to build a fence around that wisdom, and to greet each person with a friendly countenance. Thank you. Next, we have some remarks from his philanthropic partner. Steve Nassiter.
I want to begin by thanking Karen, Dan, Susie, Lois, and the whole family for providing me the honor and privilege to share a few thoughts today regarding my dear friend, Herb Wander, and the full lifetime of outstanding leadership he provided his Jewish community. By the way, I was the guy that said, okay, you can have your hot dogs. I first met Herb in 1971-72 when I professionally joined the Federation. I remember that Herb was selected the Young Leadership Awardee in 1973, and deservedly so, as he was part of a group that was referred to as the Young Turks. Leaders like Bob Schreier, Oliver Sholem, David Smerling, and many others, who from early adulthood on were drawn to JUF and were already serving on boards of directors within the Federation system. Herb and his contemporaries were pushing the institution forever forward by setting forth visions for what could be, especially in the further advancement of Jewish education at all levels and the increased strengthening of our community support for our brothers and sisters in Israel and around the globe. It was that vision that heavily contributed to the 1974 merger of the Jewish Welfare Fund and the Jewish Federation, which was huge and a needed step in unifying our Chicago Jewish community. It was my good fortune to be assigned the task of professionally staffing an idea that these young leaders had to establish a Dialogues in Jewish Life program, a 2-year program of monthly Jewish learning experiences involving couples primarily in their 30s and 40s, who for 2 years learned together, celebrated Jewish life together, and then traveled on a JUF dialogue mission to Israel. That dialogue template with leaders like Herb and Ruthie, Zichrona Livracha, really became the role models and helped Dialogues become the program to participate in, with a long waiting list and countless numbers of those participating going on to become major Jewish leaders, not just here in Chicago, but nationally as well. I learned much from that experience, and in 1979, I was chosen to become the Federation executive, and less than 2 years later, Herb was elected chairman of the board, and our friendship was further strengthened by a partnership that had us working together every day for 2 years. During the years of Herb's chairmanship, he continued to push for Jewish engagement opportunities. The Send a Kid to Israel program, which was essentially a partnership between Synagogue Federation and Young Families, was inaugurated and continues to this day. That program, which Herb helped launch, resulted in a large number of Jewish teens have a meaningful summer experience in Israel. It also furthered the ties of partnership between Synagogue and Federation that we continued to build on. Also during that period, many of our educational agencies were running major deficits and on the brink of extinction. I remember working with Herb and our finance colleagues on a number of stopgap schemes to help keep them open. The 1981-83 period was a time in this country of economic downturn. I remember Herb and I having private meetings with Governor Thompson and also Mayor Jane Byrne, where we and they discussed the importance of Federation's human service network of services, and they had their staffs work diligently with ours in an effort to help those most suffering from the downturn. A connected outgrowth of those meetings was the establishment of Federation's Government Affairs Office in Springfield and later DC. And there was some controversy about that move, as some were concerned that our nonpartisan Federation could be harmed as a result of our lobbying efforts. Herb's view was that the concern was legitimate, and as a result, we would open the office and be very careful to stay away from tax advocacy issues and solidify our nonprofit leadership position in the state and the country by behaving as a nonpartisan champion for programs and funds for people in need. 40 years and a couple of $1 billion later, the Government Affairs Initiative is obviously self-evident. In 1982, following horrific PLO terrorist attacks on Jewish communities along the northern border of Israel, the Lebanon War took place. And Herb helped lead us in our public advocacy strategies, missions to Israel, and the development of an Israel crisis appeal that raised millions of dollars to assist families in Israel who suffered losses during the conflict. When Herb stepped out of the role as chairman, his successor, Corky Goodman, and I asked him to lead our Jewish Communal Relations Council, which at that time was a coalition of about 36 Jewish organizations. Herb, as always, said yes and took on the responsibilities with the seriousness and joy that he brought to all his Jewish activities. As chair of the Chicago JCRC, he was asked to become a board and executive committee member of the National JCRCA. And in that capacity, he chaired its anti-apartheid committee. And in 1987, as you heard, he led a mission to South Africa during the years when Nelson Mandela was in prison. That was a major national position, and Herb, with his brilliant legal mind, was the perfect leader. Years later, when Mandela was released, Herb was one of 4 national Jewish leaders invited to meet with Mandela in Geneva, Switzerland, before he came to the United States as part of the worldwide tour following all those years in prison. Herb never boasted about any of his achievements or roles, but I knew he was excited to represent the American Jewish community to Mandela, who was known had antagonism toward the state of Israel. Herb truly felt the meeting helped soften the hard feelings, and those of us who knew of the meeting and what transpired were very proud of Herb's role in influencing the world's leading symbol of human rights. In 1993, 10 years after Herb chaired the board, all the past campaign chairmen met. It was Ed Fox, who was the chairman at that time, and selected Herb to lead the annual campaign. Over the years, we have had many campaign chairmen who went on to be board chairs, but never was there a former board chair who years after serving was asked to lead the campaign. Without hesitation, Herb said yes, knowing full well that the 93 campaign would be very challenging because we were continuing to raise additional funds for Operation Exodus, which meant it would be very difficult to keep the regular campaign up to the level it needed to be. Not an easy assignment, but Herb led the effort to raise $54 million for the regular campaign and another $17 million for Operation Exodus. That put our total over $100 million for the fund to help Soviet Jews resettle. Those were large and needed dollars in 1993, and when you think about it, they're still pretty large numbers. As we think about the list and range of Herb's activities and service to the Jewish and general community, it's hard not to realize that this is the stuff of legend. From his many years of leading the effort to provide needed help to Hispanic immigrants through the Highland Park Community Family Center, to his chairmanship of Michael Reese Health Trust, for whom he provided stellar leadership. In '96, when he was awarded the Rosenwald Award, he welcomed the award, but was uncomfortable by all the attention. Listening to all who have spoken today, I think Herb's many attributes have been identified. Intellectually gifted, compassionate, wise, loving, devoted, generous, caring, Jewishly committed, and perhaps most important, trustworthy and humble. As it happens, this week's Torah portion is essentially a lesson in leadership. We learn that God chose Moses to lead the people of Israel because Moses was more humble than any person on earth and more trustworthy than anyone else in God's estate. Trustworthy and humble. Our friend Herbert S Wander was a great leader because he too was trustworthy and humble. How fortunate each of us are to have had Herb Wander in our lives.
And lastly, some words from his wife Karen, read by her son Brian. And Julie, you're going to come up as well.
Herb and I were introduced to each other by Joy Grossman and Elaine Mushin. Herb always wanted to make people comfortable, asked me if I'd like to go to dinner, or he was invited to a party that we could attend together. I chose the party in case we didn't click. It'd be easier for both of us. Well, I was so very wrong. From that first date, we were a couple. Our years together were a snapshot in time, but a picture bigger than life. Our story together was always about summer weekends with family at our pool, family trips and grandchildren's sporting events, and our blended friends' dinners. We also enjoyed going to the theater, where we each took our best naps. We enjoyed Herb's corporate law meetings, where he worked and I played. We'd have dinners with our corporate law friends and then head to the bar, and we were always the last ones to leave. We traveled the world together. Our most amazing trips are with the Jewish Federation. When Herb had to start dialysis, our travels stopped. We decided, let's try Florida. It worked out well for Herb. He was able to play golf and fly back to Chicago the next day for meetings. We had many new friends in Florida and enjoyed our time with each of them. Herb, you fought so hard so that you could still have our lives together. You're the bravest man I will ever know. Your courage, your fortitude, and strength in the last 5 years were remarkable. Your words, Herb, will always be with me. These are quotes. I never worry about me. I only worry about Karen. Patience and tolerance, and best of all, never fear. Herb is here. I will love you always. Rest in peace, my sweet Herb. Love and hugs, Karen. And I just wanted to thank Herb for loving and taking care of my mom and our family. As you've heard everybody speak today, he was the quintessential mensch. There are very few people that can make the world a better place when they depart, and he did it, and he was such a gift to everybody that knew him and all the people that he helped that never knew his helping hands. May he rest in peace. Zikra nam livracha, Herb.
The sages say each of us has 3 names. The first is given by our parents. The second is the one we are called by our friends. And the third is the one that we earn through our deeds. And the third, they say, is the one that is most cherished, most honored. Herb earned an incredible name in this world through the work that he did, the wisdom that he shared, the family that he created and sustained. He will be missed. I never knew Herb. I don't want to pretend that I did. But to be here in this moment, what an honor to bear witness to the memory of your father, your husband, of your friend. And he knew. Not everyone knows the impact they had. But I heard stories of an 80th birthday celebration where you had the chance to tell him what he meant to you, where he had the opportunity to sit under his vine and fig tree and celebrate all that he had created. As Brian said, a true mensch. May his memory be for an enduring blessing. Please rise for the memorial prayer. El male rachamim, shochein bamromim, hamtzei menucha nechona, tachat kanfei ashchina, im kedoshim utorim, kizor harakia mazhirim. Et nishmat Shmuel ben Leib, שהלך לעולמו. בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בתורה חיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence, among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Herbert S Wander, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be God's possession, and may his repose be peace. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the services. The interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery located at 9900 Grosse Pointe Road in Skokie. Family will be returning here for the first part of the Shiva. So all of you that have a service folder, please note all the Shiva information, be it here or the Dan Wander and Ruth Friedman residence, is all here on the service folder. Shiva coordinator is Merle Steyer, if you have any questions. Memorial contributions in his memory to the Michael Reese Health Trust, the Herbert S Wander Fund, or the Jewish United Fund of Metropolitan Chicago. And for those of you who are online, all that information can be found on our website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, when you entered, you told them if you were going, your cars are already lined up, ready to go. You'll have to walk to your cars. For those of you who are not going to the cemetery, I kindly ask you to stay in this room and wait till the procession is left. Then the gentleman here at Northmore will bring your car to you. For those of you who will be in the procession, please be sure your bright lights and hazard lights are on at all times. Use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Please do not speak on your cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. At this time, I invite those of you who have been honored to serve as pallbearers to come forward as we escort the casket of Herbert S. Wander from this room. We're going to be using this ramp. We're going to go slowly. I ask all of you to please rise. And then we're going to escort the family from this room. And then finally, for those of you who are going to the cemetery, kindly go to your cars. At this time, we are going to turn off the live stream. Thank you for attending.
We now come to a very special moment in this annual meeting, and a most pleasant one for me to perform. I refer to the presentation of the Julius Rosenwald Memorial Award, which, as you know, is named in honor of one of the leading founders of the Federation. His name and memory have become synonymous with compassion and philanthropy in our community and throughout the United States. Since 1962, this award has been presented annually to the member of our Jewish community who best represents the spirit and actions of the late Julius Rosenwald in breadth and depth of concern and commitment to the Jewish community and for all mankind. Today's recipient of the Julius Rosenwald Award, Herbert S. Wander, has demonstrated outstanding leadership and qualities throughout his adult life in jurisprudence, business, and philanthropic endeavors. A partner at the law firm of Catton, Muchin, and Davis, a lifelong partner to his wife, Ruthie, and a most trustworthy, innovative, and active partner in the world of the Jewish Federation, he exemplifies the values of Julius Rosenwald, in whose memory this award is bestowed. Herb is that unique leader of the Jewish community who has achieved greatness in furthering the well-being of the Jewish people. He is the 34th recipient of the award, which is presented each year to the individual who has achieved the most in the advancement of the goals and purposes of the Federation and the welfare of the entire Jewish community. Herb Wander was president of the Jewish Federation from 1981 to 1983 and served as the general chairman of the 1993 Jewish United Fund, Israel Emergency Fund, and Operation Exodus campaigns. He also headed the Jewish Community Relations Council and was the first chairman of the Federation's Resource and Development Committee. Nationally, he has served as the regional chairman of the National Young Leadership Cabinet of the United Jewish Appeal. His career as an attorney is equally distinguished. He has published widely and in legal journals, and he lectures frequently on securities regulations. He also serves on the Legal Advisory Committee to the National Association of Security Dealers and is a retired member of the Legal Advisory Committee to the New York Stock Exchange Board of Governors. At present, he is the chairman of the 53,000-member business law section of the American Bar Association, a director of the Telephone and Data Systems, and a trustee of the Michael Reese Foundations. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan and Yale Law School. In the spiritual realm, Herb and his wife and son are actively involved at the Eitz Chaim Center for Jewish Learning and have integrated the richness of Judaism in their everyday life. It is clear that Herb Wander has truly followed the wonderful example of Julius Rosenwald and the founders of our Federation. It is an honor for me to present the Julius Rosenwald Award to him at this time. Herb, would you come up to the lectern? I'd like for you to accept this medallion, named in memory of Julius Rosenwald, in honor of those characteristics which were his trademark, and in the opinion of gathered here today, are also yours. On the back of this medallion, you will find the inscription presented by the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago to Herbert S. Wander for distinguished achievement and leadership in advancing the cause of human welfare for the Jewish Federation. Having received this medallion, Herb, you will soon see your name carved in the marble wall in the lobby of our Federation building, so that in future those who come to visit the Federation will have the opportunity to see that our community has had leaders who stand out amongst men and women, and that you are one of these outstanding individuals.
Joel and everyone else here, let me thank you so much for this honor. I am extremely pleased, honored, and humbled to be this year's Rosenwald Memorial Award recipient. The personal satisfaction I have gained as a result of my activities on behalf of the Jewish community has been reward enough. I want to share this high honor with all those with whom I have worked and who have been my teachers and mentors along this very pleasing journey. Indeed, I would like to thank so many of you who are here today, my friends who go back to college, my family, to the staff of the Federation, Steve, and everyone else with whom I've worked for probably 25, 30 years. Particularly want to point out Jim Rice, with whom I had the pleasure of working and learning under for a great many years, and I'm very happy to see you here, Jim. And I miss Joel Shinsky also. I would like to also thank my partners and associates at Cat & Mushin, a great many of whom are here. I am proud to be a member of the firm, and I want to thank you for your unlimited support. I also want to thank Tony, who's here, my secretary, with whom I couldn't really operate. I'd like to thank my mother, who traveled from Cincinnati, and she's here. You saw her a few minutes ago. And finally, I'd like to thank my immediate family, my son Danny, my daughter Susie and her husband Rich, my other daughter Lois, who unfortunately is planning a big show in San Francisco and could not be here, and of course Ruthie, my life mate. In early June of this year, I was at Shabbos services on Saturday morning, and the Torah portion was chapter 8 of the book of Numbers, which deals with the relationship of the Levites to the Jewish community. And in that chapter, God says, let the Israelites, I think meaning the community, lay their hands upon the Levites. This is the ordination, the shmicha. And from that statement in the Torah, we began a discussion of what is Jewish leadership, particularly in our community today. About a week later, I was informed that I was a recipient of the Rosenwald Award. And so the two events have caused me to seriously think about what is it that leadership demands and that the community demands from its leaders, and how do we accomplish developing both community and leaders. I'll start off with the statement that I do not think we have enough quality leadership needed for this very complex and ever-changing environment in which we live. I think, to a large extent, leadership mirrors the general community, and it's a reflection of the general community. We get what we deserve. So what's going on? Why is it that I think we do not have enough leadership? What I did was, I thought, well, we shouldn't really blame the times that we live in. Yes, they are complex, they are stressful. The explosion in communications and everything else puts us under enormous pressure. But I suspect the times 50 years ago, 100 years ago, were just as stressful, just as difficult, and we didn't have all the creature comforts that we do now. So I can't really blame the times. I think in large part it's a convenient excuse to blame somebody else, that we don't have leaders because, or the leaders don't do this because, or the community doesn't support this because, and it's always blaming somebody else without taking the personal responsibility to act in a communal manner or to act as a leader. I think we're all prone to do that, and I think one good example of it from the Jewish community is how too frequently we blame some shortcoming on anti-Semitism, for example. I didn't get the promotion because the boss was anti-Semitic. So what I did is I tried to list the attributes or skills of a leader and of a community to try and figure out what is the central feature that distinguishes us and that will provide us with the leadership and the community to face the next century. So I made a list of those skills or attributes of both leaders and committee. And the thing I was struck by after having prepared the list was that, first, there were no absolutes. For every attribute, there was the negative. For example, to be a leader, you have to be a leader. You have to be positive. You have to be able to change what's necessary to meet the times that you face. On the other hand, I think at times a leader has to be stubborn, to stick to their own hardcore beliefs that they have nurtured throughout their life. So I found no absolutes, and I also found that most of the attributes on both sides of the ledger, for the leader and for the community, We're mirrors of one another, and that what we need to do, both as a community and as leaders, is both follow the same roadmap. What are some of these? Well, from the leader point of view, you have to have timing. You have to be in the right spot at the right time. You have to have vision. You have to have the 360-degree vision that's necessary. You have to have realistic assessment, not only of the environment, but also of yourself. You have to have the ability to listen, the ability to change. You have to have patience, and yet you have to have persistence. You have to have a positive attitude. You have to be a planner to think ahead. You also have to have faith in the community. You have to have a foundation of information and education. You need a hardcore set of beliefs. You also shouldn't take yourself too seriously, and you should be humorous at times. You also have to do your best and continually stretch yourself. You have to be able to build consensus. You have to realize you're not irreplaceable and you're not infallible. You have to develop successors, and you have to be tolerant of those with whom you work and lead. And finally, I think you have to be humble enough to recognize that you are not the center of the universe. From the community side, almost all of these things equally apply. But I think there are some of special note. You don't have to leave everything to the leader to do. You have to participate. You have to be educated. You have to have realistic expectations. You have to be supportive of the leaders, and that means both in your work and in your financial support. You have to avoid zealotry. You have to develop a community agenda. You have to recognize and acknowledge that times change. You have to understand that you can't have everything, that you must have more modest expectations. You must have loyalty, a word that I think a great many of us have forgotten. You have to stick the course. You have to avoid the glitter. You have to recognize, like the leaders, we're all imperfect. You have to think, and you have to be tolerant. Now, after having developed the list, what is the central sort of theme that I came away with from all this? I think it's the passion to make the world a better place than when we entered it. As Steve said, tikkun olam, to repair the world. I think all flows from this, and if each of us has that as our mantra or motto, and we think beyond ourselves, I think we will be a great credit to the community and to the world at large. Now, where does this lead me? Well, in a few days, we will all be celebrating Rosh Hashanah, the new year. Let's approach the new year not so much with a plea for forgiveness for our sins, or with a prayer that we be entered in the book of life for a good year. Instead, embrace the new year as a rebirth, and to think of it as a turning. How can I, or how should I, turn from what I've been doing to make the world a better place? If we do this, and if we implement some of the things, the world will indeed be a better place. I know Ruthie joins me in wishing all of you a sweet year.
Congratulations, Herb. That was a beautiful, beautiful acceptance speech. You're really a most deserving honoree, and I'm glad I've known you a few years as well. And Ruthie.
When I graduated law school, I'm from Cincinnati, as I said, and I would have gone to work with one of the major law firms there, but they weren't hiring Jews. It was interesting, though. I just felt they were wrong. I didn't feel that badly. And it wound up, I'm better off coming to Chicago anyway, et cetera, et cetera. So I've seen anti-Semitism. Cincinnati was actually sort of a southern city at that time. I mean, the blacks could not go swimming with you, et cetera. You know, it was, you're talking 60, 70 years ago. And the most rude awakening I had was, I had a legal matter in Atlanta before the Public Service Commission, and we were representing a client who wanted them to have competitive bidding. But, you know, I even though I had seen a lot of this growing up, it stunned me to see two different water fountains for them to the blacks and the whites to drink out of. I can remember being in high school and everyone meeting at the JCC, seeing some pictures of the displaced persons who were living in tents in terrible conditions in Israel, and then going out, and the community was alerted that they were going to be personally solicited for gifts for the UJA at that time. So that was probably when I was 16, 17 years old. So that's my earliest awareness of Israel, but it had a indelible effect on me. 6-Day War, unfortunately that's when my father passed away, so I can always remember the 6-Day War during our sitting Shiva. And although it was sort of a blessing in the sense that, you know, Israel was coming out on top, and so you had sort of something to cheer about. Seventh Day War, the October War, I can remember it was during the holidays, and we were all at synagogue, and really instead of having the service, everyone was listening to the radio to find out what was going on. I've had so many trips. I mean, a lot of them were very good. So we're cleaning out our house. So my son took the picture of his first trip to Israel, which was the first family mission ever to Israel. And they were about 10 years old, 8 years old, 3 years old at the time. And so a number of the families we've still become friendly with. One of the missions we were on was Black September, when Jordan kicked out all the Palestinians and the fighting was going on, and we could see it across the river. The missions were great. There was a guy named Shenhabi who was the sort of UJA mission leader, and he was tough. He carried a gun and all that. And once we were actually going to Masada, and he wanted to take the long route. He didn't want to go through Bethlehem. And Bobby Schreier and I said, no, we're going to go through Bethlehem. He made a sign, we'll take responsibility. We had the mission, the 100th anniversary mission, and we went on the art portion of that, which was very interesting. We had a great trip, by the way, with Mark Kirk to Israel, particularly because he got us into a number of military installations that we wouldn't have seen. Drone makers, and it's interesting, he got us to see a number of the military and diplomatic people who actually did the work. I guess proudest is taking my grandchildren on a trip there. So, and they've been there many times now, so that was a great trip. Getting them to see the whole country and swimming in En-Gedi and doing all the other things. So it was a very personal trip. And now Israel, we haven't gone for 2 years, but every time you go, it's a totally different country. It's just different. It's bigger, better. When I was chairman of JCRC, I led a mission to South Africa. This is before Nelson Mandela was out of prison. And there were about 15 or so of us, and we had access through Aviva. What's Aviva's last name? She now works in Washington. She worked for National NACRAC at the time. She's from South Africa, and her former in-laws were very prominent there. And so we had access to virtually everybody from the outlawed African National Congress, who actually were our guides, and Paul Simon was there the same time we were. In the same building we were in, the next day it was blown up. And we met people, from the government, from the far right-wing parties. We met the business people. We met the Jewish community, spent time with the judiciary, got a really in-depth feeling of South Africa. And then I was fortunate enough, when Nelson Mandela was released, he was coming, he made a worldwide trip, and he was coming to the United States. And a number of the Jewish leaders wanted to meet with him beforehand. I think, frankly, soften his antagonism towards Israel. So we met him in Geneva, a group of about 4 of us, 5 of us. The community has become, I think, much more organized and dedicated, much larger. I mean, this is a major operation now. I think when I was campaign chairman, we maybe raised $35 million. We raised that the other night at the Crown Dinner at the start of the campaign. But the community also has a lot more people moving in and out of it. The challenges never cease. You continue to have challenges, whether it be the BDS, whether it be anti-Semitism, whether it be lack of budgetary support from the state of Illinois. So I think one of the things is you have to build a strong base and continually be aware of the changes that you're going to face. Years ago, you never had to have kosher food at events. So there's more of a also recognition that the tent is very big, and you've got lots of different people inside the tent that you have to satisfy, which is also a challenge because it becomes harder, particularly in today's climate where there's so much political unrest. And whether you're for Netanyahu, whether you're not for him, whether what Israel's doing is right, is bigger questions than we had then. Israel was, at that time, essentially the underdog, and everybody in the world loved Israel. Now we're the overdog, and it's different. Things have switched entirely, 180 degrees. I think it was really an outgrowth of the UJA's what was it? The cabinet, the young leadership cabinet that we had, and a number of us from Chicago, particularly Bobby Schreier, who we all miss terribly. He and I thought that we needed a more intensive, not necessarily education, but awareness of what was going on in the community. And so we developed the program, which, as I recall, was actually a 2-year program, including a trip to Israel at the end of it. So it was, I remember spending weekends in Camp Shai, having different speakers. It was sort of, I guess, really a forerunner of like the Wexler program. And it was very successful. People became very active. And then the key is, once they get active, well, what do you have them do? Is there something for them to do besides making phone calls to collect money? And so we tried to get people on the board. I think one of the things going back when I was on the board is we said that any board committee could be made up, as long as it had a majority of Federation board members, could have outside members on it. So that was, again, broadening the scope. It was, I think, very rewarding. It lasted many, many years, and many of our people not only became leaders in the community, but employees here. When Michael Reese Hospital was sold, the proceeds went into the trust, and the trust has been set up to grant money to the underserved in the Chicago area, including the Jewish community. And thank goodness, over the past 20 years, the corpus has grown probably to $130 million, which enables us to give out about $5 or $6 million. And we have had in the past 2 types of programs. One, sort of a responsive program, which organizations servicing the healthcare needs of the community, and that's broadly defined, can apply for grants in the $30,000 to $50,000 range. And then we had a program called Proactive Grants, where we went out and said, here's a need in the community, let's get these 3 organizations together, like homelessness, for example, and see how we can make an impact on changing the lack of housing and care for the homeless. So we've been very successful in all of those areas. And we also have a grant to the Federation, which is about $300,000, the income each year, that goes to Federation agencies. And the work, the work has 2 aspects to it. One, we don't have enough time and money to really cure or defeat all the problems in the community. It's just too much. On the other hand, what we do, we think, has been very good. For example, we were one of the first organizations to really care for our veterans who came back from Iraq and from Afghanistan, and coordinated efforts between all of the service organizations to get people to focus on that, particularly the employment needs as well as the emotional needs of the families, particularly those who had lost people in the war. So we've done some very, very good things. The only problem is we don't have enough money to do everything. And we're now gone through a very extensive strategic plan where we've identified 8 areas that we're going to focus on. And hopefully those will be fluid and change from year to year. For example, dental care. The states really aren't providing it. And there are people out in the streets who don't take care of their teeth, which then harms their whole body, etc. So that's one of our focuses. Getting kids to get interested in a health care career starting in high school. And that's been very successful, the Chicago Public Schools, in that graduation rate for those kids goes up by a very big percentage from the kids who don't take these kinds of programs. So we have, we're always thinking of doing something better and having a greater impact. Danny's been very active both in Hillel, and he was one of the instigators or starters of the Chicago Hillel program, which I think is a terrific idea and it's been successful. And then he's been on the JFCS board and was chairman last year, and they were able to build this new center, which is quite lovely. And you know, he's very good at organizing and prompting people and encouraging them. So that's terrific. My youngest child works for JCFS in San Francisco. My other daughter's on the board at Hillel at Stanford, and she's now chairman of the budgeting committee for San Francisco. It's rewarding. You sort of think, well, maybe I did something right. And you know, they're all very dedicated.